Hey guys, it's me Kevin, and today I'm going to be making another type of AFL video. And well, you saw my round 23 prediction. I only got 3 out of 9, or almost 4, because North Melbourne was also on an afternoon on Saturday. It's just that it was at the 2:10, not 1:45. So consider it 4 out of 9. Anyway, today I'm going to be doing an AFL women's fixture request. Now, as you know, last year was a disaster for the AFL women's fixture. Not every team got to play each other once, and both North Melbourne and Melbourne were snubbed from the finals despite having more wins than Carlton and Geelong due to the fact that they're in a different poll. Now, I've got a few ways to get around this on my fixture request. For one, if you remember last year, each team was playing every other team in its poll, plus 3 teams from the opposite poll. Now, we have 7 teams in each poll, because there's now 14 teams in the competition, thanks to the addition of West Coast, Gold Coast, Richmond and St Kilda. So that makes it 14 teams split into 7 polls, and considering that the last few years they've been playing 7 games, each team, well, it's going to stay that way, except that one team is going to play every other team in the opposite poll. So basically the 7 teams in Pool A will play the 7 teams in Pool B. No teams will play each other in the same pool. And that should mean it makes it more fair, as each pool has a sample space that's as accurate as possible. Let me quickly mention something before I start the fixture request. The time slots, all in Eastern Daylight Time, are Friday 7:50, Saturday 2:35, Saturday 4:45, Saturday 7:55, Sunday 2 o'clock, Sunday 4:10, and Sunday 6:20. All of them are PM, obviously. The slots that will be televised on Channel 7 are Friday 7:50, Saturday 7:55, and Sunday 4:10, whilst all other slots will be televised on Fox Footy, or if there is an AFL JLT match being played at the same time, on Fox Sports 507. Another thing I've got to mention is the pools. Pool A will have Adelaide, Brisbane, Geelong, Collingwood, North Melbourne, St Kilda and West Coast, whilst Pool B will have Carlton, Fremantle, Gold Coast, GWS, Melbourne, Richmond and the Western Bulldogs. Let's get started. So, on the 29th of January, the AFL women's season will start, where Carlton will get their season opener slot back against Collingwood, as they both face off at Icon Park, because let's face it, apart from GMHBA Stadium, Icon Park is probably the best stadium in the AFL Women's in Melbourne, so it's pretty much appropriate to start at that venue. And Carlton Collingwood, well, they started off in the last 2 years, so it's just appropriate they get it back. Particularly that Carlton made the grand final last year. The only alternative one could be Geelong Carlton, but I don't think Carlton should be excluded for a second year in a row. The other thing that are important to note is that Richmond will play their very first game at Swinburne Centre against Geelong, whilst West Coast play their first game on a Sunday afternoon against the Bulldogs at Mineral Resources Park. In addition, on Channel 7, there will be a Gold Coast Brisbane derby at Metricon Stadium. Now, why I had St Kilda play an away game to start the season whilst I didn't have West Coast playing Fremantle is, well, because they're not on free-to-air, and I want those St Kilda's first home match and West Coast first derby against Fremantle to be on free-to-air. The latter also being at Optus Stadium. So on that note, let's get to round 2. On February the 8th, round 2 will start, where the grand final rematch, Adelaide versus Carlton, takes place at Adelaide Oval. Obviously, they'll be on free-to-air television on a primetime slot on Friday night. On Saturday, should I say afternoon or night? Because, well, it's afternoon local time, night Eastern time, where Fremantle and West Coast face off at Optus Stadium. Whilst on Sunday afternoon, it's St Kilda versus Melbourne at RSEA Safety Park, which is St Kilda's home ground. Other factors are Brisbane and Richmond will play on Sunday twilight. One thing to note with that slot, I know I said Sunday 6:20. I think I had a lot of people raising their eyebrows. Why would you play that late? Well, it's because most of them that play in this slot are actually WA and Queensland sides who are an hour and 3 hours behind Eastern Time. So, round 3 starts on Friday the 14th of February, which is Valentine's Day, though that's nothing got to do with the AFL, so well worth mentioning. But to start off round 3, we head to Darwin TIO Stadium, where Adelaide face off Fremantle. Well, they've been facing off at that same ground for the last few years anyway, so face off there again. It's probably a little bit earlier than usual. I made it start at 6:20 their time to meet the 7:50 demand. I'm not sure if that was a good idea, considering that even at 8:30 at night last year, they were using the heat warning, but we'll see with that. Probably worth being on prime time. Another thing that's worth mentioning is North Melbourne actually play all their home games in Tassie, whether it's Launceston or Hobart. That's fine because there's only about 3 or 4 home games that each team plays in the season. Another thing that's also worth mentioning is Gold Coast will play their home games at Metricon Stadium, not just the special ones. So, because, well, there is no other ground at Metricon at Gold Coast, unless you want to count Frank Horsa Reserve, but that's a really bad ground. I don't know why you'd play there. Another exhibition match on a Friday night, which is the 21st of February, and that's between GWS and North Melbourne. Well, they've been playing at Manuka for the last few years. They've been playing one game there, so just continue that trend. Like the Darwin game from last week, it will also be on primetime free-to-air television. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that Brisbane, I want them to play their home games at Brisbane Showgrounds, because it's probably better than that dumb Moreton Bay Complex or South Pine. I know it's relatively old, but I think it'd be, with capacity-wise, it'd probably be better than the other 2 grounds. That's until Springfield is completed. Fremantle play their first game at Fremantle Oval in round 4. Apart from that, there isn't anything else worth mentioning there. Oh, wait, one more thing. St Kilda play Carlton in New Zealand, because I feel that the AFL and AFLW should start playing one game a season in Wellington, and that's why I feel the women's will be playing St Kilda and Carlton, who the last time an AFL game was played in Wellington, it was between St Kilda and Carlton. So yeah, I think those 2 teams will play again in Wellington at 4 o'clock their time. I didn't decide to put this on free-to-air for one reason, because if I was, it'd be about 6:10 Wellington time, and I don't think anyone will want to attend that at that time. I mean, it'd be hard to get people over at 4 o'clock, let alone 6:10. And I was definitely not going to get anyone over there at 9 o'clock at night, so I wasn't going to do Friday or Saturday night either. But I feel like they should get a game over there. So, on the 28th of February, North Melbourne versus Richmond will be played in Hobart to kick off round 5. Now, I chose North Melbourne to play Richmond at Blundstone. Well, for the 3rd week in a row, it's in a place where doesn't house an AFL team at the moment. Another reason is that the last time a game in Hobart was played on a Friday night, it was between North Melbourne and Richmond back in the AFL. And that was back in 2016. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that Collingwood, they didn't play at Hobart Centre, Holden Centre last year, but they did in the first 2 years before they returned back to Victoria Park. Now, what I did with Collingwood was I split 2 of their games at Victoria Park, which was the first 2 games they played, the first 2 home games, and now their last 2 home games will be played at Holden Centre. So, on Friday the 7th of March, Melbourne and Collingwood will play the first game of the season at Marvel Stadium. There were 2 games played last year between those 2 sides, as well as Western Bulldogs and North Melbourne, but those were in 2019, and that will be the first for 2020, and it'll be played on the Friday night, as you can see if you're not blind. Also, Sunday 6:20, GWS, it's a quirky one, because they played just their 2nd match in New South Wales, because they played one game in Canberra. It'll also be the first time where a game is played at 6:20 p.m. local time on a Sunday night, because the first 5 are either played in Perth or Brisbane. So that'll be interesting to see how the attendances go. Quirky enough, it's against West Coast, who are playing away from home. Another quirky fixture in round 7 is only one of the 8 Victorian teams play on a free-to-wear slot, as the other 5 made up of non-Victorian teams. Funny enough, both WA sides are playing. So, on the last Friday night slot, which is on the 14th of February, Geelong played Fremantle at GMHBA Stadium. The 2 teams that played prelim finals but failed to make the grand final. Whilst probably the worst free-to-wear match ever. Yeah, I only put this on free-to-wear just to make things fair. West Coast, Gold Coast. As I said, it was only for fairity because both teams had only played one free-to-wear match before that, and I thought, no, they should at least play 2. But yeah, I'd like to see how the ratings go for that one. And the season finishes off with the Western Bulldogs and St Kilda at Western Oval, Sunday 6:20. I wonder how the attendances will go there. It'll be the first ever Victorian match to be played on a Sunday 6:20 in AFL women's history. So, apart from Geelong, who will play their home finals at GMHBA Stadium, and North Melbourne, who will play theirs at Blundstone Arena, the other 6 Victorian teams will play their home final at Icon Park to maximise the attendances, as it obviously has the highest capacity out of all of the AFL women's grounds. Maybe with the redevelopment of Western Oval, that could be a ground that could be used for AFL women's finals in the future. Apart from that, West Coast Fremantle will play theirs at the Wacker, again to maximise attendances, as well as Adelaide. Well, they play at Norwood anyway, so it's fine. GWS, similar reasons, will play theirs at Sydney Showgrounds, while Gold Coast and, funny enough, Brisbane will play theirs at Carrara. So, for the finals, it'll be the top 6 teams overall, not each pool, overall, okay? So, the 2 ladders will be combined. I know there's Pool A and Pool B, but the 2 ladders will be combined into one ladder. Anyway, so, on Friday night, for the 21st of March, it'll be 4th versus 5th, whilst on Saturday 1:20, it'll be 3rd versus 6th. Now, I did Friday 5:50 and Saturday 1:20 because that's the first round of the AFL season, and so it can be on free-to-wear prime time. I did it Friday 5:50, which leads into the main AFL match. 1:20, well, what I did, I'll be releasing an AFL fixture request for the men's later in another video, but what I'll be doing in the first 3 rounds is there'll be no matches on Saturday afternoon, and the earliest slot for those first 3 rounds will be the Saturday twilight. So yeah, there'll be that. Same goes for the next week on on Friday the 28th and Saturday the 29th, as the first place plays the lowest ranked semi-finalist, whilst second will play the higher ranked semi-finalist. Now, the grand final grounds will be a bit different. Apart from Geelong, who will play their grand final at GMHBA Stadium, or even North Melbourne, who will play theirs in Tassie, Blundstone Arena, yeah, me controversial. The other 6 teams, the same teams that played at Icon Park for the other finals, will play at Docklands Stadium for the grand final, whilst West Coast Fremantle will play at Optus, Adelaide at Adelaide Oval, GWS at Sydney Showgrounds, and Gold Coast or even Brisbane, yes, even more controversial, at Metricon Stadium. I do want to talk about the time slotting real quickly though. Last year, it was intended to be held on a Saturday afternoon, and so the Saturday afternoon slots for the AFL were cleared to broadcast that game live and free and for everyone to view it across Australia. But after Adelaide won the rights to host the grand final, because it was to be played at Adelaide Oval, and because Port Adelaide were playing on that Saturday, that meant that because Adelaide wouldn't have as good of an attendance, if it was to be played on a Saturday than a Sunday, the AFL decided to make that game a standalone game. Now, it worked in terms of attendances. It got a really, really good crowd, 53,000 people. That's almost maximum attendance. In fact, it is maximum attendance. However, there were problems in terms of the broadcasting. For one, there was nothing on Saturday afternoon for men's or women's. So technically that was a dead slot for like 3 hours. And also, Queensland viewers did not get to watch the grand final on TV because Brisbane were playing North Melbourne in that same game at the same time in the AFL men's. So to stop that from happening again, now I will applaud them to make it a standalone game because in fact attendances are more important than broadcasting, but there is a way to do both. So if the intended ground is available on the Saturday, well, it could just be played on the Saturday 2 o'clock, and then games will be played at 4:35 and 7:25 respectively, and no dramas there. But if the ground is unavailable on a Saturday, then it will be played on a Sunday instead. That means it will be played at 1:30, and 2 games will be played at 4 o'clock and 4:40 respectively, whilst the game that was intended to be on 3:20 p.m. for the AFL will be played at 7:20. Now, don't worry, there'll either be a West Coast or Fremantle home game, so there won't be bad attendances there. There is one complication, however, and that's if West Coast or Fremantle win the rights to host the grand final at Optus Stadium. Now, it can't be played on a Sunday because of the 2 other alternatives, that the AFL game would be played on a Sunday afternoon. So that would mean that it has to be played on a Saturday where Optus Stadium is available. But the problem is the grand final is scheduled 2 o'clock Eastern time, which means due to the 3-hour time difference, it'd be 11 o'clock in Perth. And that will affect attendances for the worse. So instead, what I did is there'll be a game at Saturday 1:45 and Saturday 3:20. That should say 3:20. And the one at 3:20 will be televised on 7. Those will be the 2 teams that were supposed to play on the Saturday night. Then the other 2 teams, well, their fixture won't be unaffected because they'll be 2 on Saturday 4:35 anyway. But that would mean Saturday night is available. And that would mean the AFL Women's Grand Final would start at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, which is 5 o'clock Western Time. And that basically makes everyone happy, and a lot of people will attend. And it'll also mean it'll be the first ever night grand final in either AFL or AFL Women's history. That'll be a great piece of history, wouldn't it? So, I hope you liked the video. Please subscribe. Please give it a thumbs up. Think of what you think of the video down below. And comment other ideas that I could do. And share this video with others. And especially try and make sure Gil McLaughlin or Travis Alder or someone else hears it. Because I'd like at least someone at the AFL board to see it. Just to give him some inspiration on what me and maybe some of the other fans want to see. Now, I will admit they're probably not going to do the whole fixture, and I don't think they should because, well, particularly that I left Melbourne Western Bulldogs out by accident, and I think Richmond and the Bulldogs should have started in the first round. But the things I hope they get out of this is, well, it should be that one team plays the other 7 teams from the opposite pool and no teams from their own pool. In addition, it shouldn't be 2 different ladders. It should be 1 ladder because the last thing I want to see is teams like North Melbourne and Melbourne missing out on the finals despite having more wins than Carlton and Geelong. So I think it should be opposite pools and 1 ladder with a top 6 finish. And hopefully they could get some inspiration on how to time slot the grand final. And maybe, should we make round 3 a partially floating fixture? And I'll tell you what I mean when I make my AFL men's fixture request in another video. But overall, this is just my AFL women's fixture request. And I'll make other videos, and I'll see you next week. Bye.